Hello, everybody. While government's 250 billion rand Eskom debt relief announcement is going to help stabilize the cash-strapped utility in the short term, South Africa's energy risk quotient does remain largely unchanged. That's the view of Volker van Widdern, who is Riskonet Africa's strategic risk principal. He joins me as Eskom finds itself in increasing turmoil after the sudden departure of Andre de Ruyter. You'll remember he resigned earlier, but the board wanted him out sooner rather than later. And then the very new appointment of a new chief executive officer, who is the current chief financial officer. Volker, a very warm welcome to you. So as far as Eskom is concerned, as I've mentioned, a major risk to the economy. It remains a fragile utility and in trouble.
Hi, Jeremy. Yes, the struggles that it has remain the same today as they were yesterday, unfortunately. And, with respect to the new interim chief executive, the issues that must be fixed quickly include the massive threats to reliable and quality and to specification coal delivery. So whatever happens at the top and whoever the chief executive is, if the coal that's ordered is not delivered and protected and stored according to the normal procedure, Eskom has a whole bunch of other problems, and that all contributes to the higher than rational or expected load shedding levels that we have. So yes, we had a bailout, and Eskom will have more money because it spends less money on interest, and it'll make a bigger profit because it can hardly spend the money it has. Eskom's already making a profit. It buys and pays for the coal that it has, except someone is stealing it and or switching it out and or other coal and junk is put into the power stations that causes unnecessary breakdowns and load shedding. So in that context, definitely the word fragile is appropriate, because the fundamental systems that support the consistent operation and efficient operation of the power station are being compromised. Now, what would a new CFO, CEO do? Try harder, try and get the security to work, try to get the systems for reliable coal delivery to be, function to plan, but there are deliberate interventions there that are not what one call a normal business. So I think all of us are wondering what actually can be done to overcome these new mafia environments that are operating at Eskom.
All right, Volker, thank you very much for that. So we know then that the new chief executive officer has got a tough job. What is even more concerning this week were statements that were leaked about the National Treasury making plans for a possible grid collapse. We also know that unofficially on Tuesday this week, I think it was, we did hit stage 7 load shedding. So the problems are just mounting, aren't they?
Yes. And the difficulty is, as we mentioned, in fairness to the Eskom teams, if they believe that putting normal coal into the power stations and rubbish is going in instead, and that exacerbates load shedding, that will push us from a planned 6 to maybe an accidental 7 or 8. And therefore, people are really, within our scenario environment that we recommend, planning for either long periods of 6 and 8, or and I think in the context of grid failure, Andre de Ruyter gave a good example of what it means in terms of the megahertz and the 52 and other stuff that has to be managed. But I think their system management will, to a large degree, prevent grid failure. But if we're running at stage 8 in order to prevent grid failure, and we have maybe only a third of the day as available power, the productivity in the country really plummets. Now, one can prepare for that by just stopping your business, but can you imagine all the factories that just can't work on a third of the day as available power? So that is another ball game altogether, if those are the kind of issues. And more than half of this seems to be willful tampering in terms of maintenance and poor coal.
So how then, Volker, should companies be re-looking at the way in which they approach this? You referenced the importance of scenario planning. You've written about this. What do they need to do? What's the strategic approach here?
It is to say we've probably passed the line in the sand. There's got to be a line in the sand where new decisions are taken. And we've talked about microgrids and nodal power generation. But if we say that we say, well, what is the biggest generator that we, let's say, as a small industrial hub, can buy together? Now, these things are big. They are thousands of megawatts. You can get that generator, and I've tested this in 6 or 9 months. You can get massive generators delivered. So those are sometimes too big for one factory or one client, which is absolutely fine. You order it, you install the diesel tanks, and that can be up and running in 6 to 9 months' time. That generator can then, in that little block or club or suburb or factory node, reduce load shedding from 8 to 4, perhaps 2. Now, those decisions need to be made. So one's then going to deploy millions of rand, and then within 12 months, you know that you have a certain amount of power that you're sharing in a factory node or wherever that substation is placed, and you have it wired in. So we have the authority now to generate our own power. What we're not doing is we're not collaborating across high-end users or users who need continuous power in a certain time zone and others that may be able to switch in other forms of power. And then in the next year, hopefully solar and storage comes in more and more. So then the next big check can be written and saying, okay, we now want storage. So let's get solar going flat out and make sure that instead of just having solar, we really invest in batteries. Now, from a strategic point of view, it's an uncomfortable point, but those are the things that really have to happen. The issues that go with scenario planning include the fact that Eskom has to switch off another 5 to 10,000 megawatts in the next 5 years. Now, in that context, where's the power going to come from? It will come from renewables, but then the renewables are constrained because they are so far planned in remote areas where there's no transmission capacity aligned yet. Now, how can we accelerate that? Well, I'd rather have 80% of renewable capacity in Gauteng than 100% in the Northern Cape, which cannot be connected to Gauteng. So rather make sure that we get into, again, a line in the sand and saying, we'll get things going that can work to a degree. It may be slightly inefficient in terms of the ideal, but it's much better than what is the constraint at the moment. And yes, of course, transmission will work in 5 years' time and so forth, when other better technologies are available. So the strategy is to really look around and say, we can solve the alternative power generation together by making sure that we then find these alternative mechanisms and share the load and find an efficient cost of power generation, and then use Eskom as and when it's available. But in that context, you cannot run a factory on 50% availability. It's just not on.
That cooperative or collegial approach that you're talking about makes perfect sense. But of course, it does require a complete change of mindset as far as business leadership is concerned.
Yes, and we have very good forums. I think South Africa is excellent in terms of its innovation and so forth, Business Unity SA and so forth. And we have many local business forums, whether it's regional or whichever it may be. And I think and I think to the fault of this is that we've been waiting for better levels of load shedding. Those regional business forums, whether they're literally suburban, whether it's, as I say, Roslyn or Kuruleni or Thunderbell Park, where heavy power is required, those forums really need to decide, look, we've invested tens of billions in our factories. If we invest another billion in power, it's only another 10%. For goodness sakes, it's about the factory, guys. It's about the economy. And at that level, those investments are quite reasonable. So turning it around and saying, we will make a 50% or a commitment to be 50% independent of the grid. That is the regional collaboration that's really needed. And that strategic intervention is what we should be planning for. The other side of it, of course, with the budget, sorry, if we go there, is what happens with the additional debt on the government balance sheet. And if we do this now, while the rand is still a relatively good 18 to the dollar, imagine trying to do this when the rand's 30 to the dollar. So that's the next scenario planning element. So the debt that's coming onto the government balance sheet ultimately is going to cause another major step in the currency rates. If we look forward about a year, the rand depreciates by the differential in interest rates, which is 3 to 5%. But ultimately, we will become a notch lower down, a risk higher, and the rand is going to have another kick. Now, can you imagine paying for your power at 18 in terms of capex versus 30? Different ballgame. So those lines in the sand and the way we respond to...
It's a complete no-brainer, yeah.
yeah, must be done, with that time context in mind.
Part of the scenario planning, and it's a difficult one to do, but you've also got to factor out, I imagine, the increasingly strident political noise that exists around the problem.
Yeah, and lots of promises are made, and people may or may not show up as planned. At the end of the day, the biggest win is that there's a deregulation of self-power generation. What we need to do is now aggregate that across like-minded regions, people, businesses, and then feed that into the grid. But feed it in right where it's missing. So there's no more transmission that needed in the substation that's outside Vanderbijl Park. It's already there. It's just not getting enough current from Eskom. So we need to just have a parallel input and put another wire in there, whatever the naivety of that statement may be. So the point is, if we then overcome that and say, that's all right, we can huff and puff as much as we like, but there are significant other things that are going to happen. We're going to have a general election. We will have significant changes in the leadership of the ANC. We're going to have perhaps a government that requires collaboration across multiple political parties with further changes to priorities. That's all that noise we're talking about. In the meantime, we have factories to run. And that's why the point about strategic risk is I have a strategic goal, produce 1 million widgets. If I don't have power, make a plan. And those strategic plans really need to come to the fore now.
Just a final question then, and it's back to this debt relief announcement that was made by the finance minister. It's all very well and good to have that, but there would be a concern about corruption and malfeasance. Critical, I imagine, that the conditions that are attached to the deal, and we don't have time to go into all of them, they've been fairly well documented. It's critical, isn't it, that they are adhered to in terms of strict rules of governance, something, Volker, that we haven't been particularly good at in the past.
Yeah, look, so we come in from a corporate strategic risk point of view. So if now, as a result of, let's say, the right intention to enhance governance, things that should happen in 1 month happen in 3 months, that's a problem. So now it further delays the potential for improved productivity at Eskom. But the other side of it, and coming back to the silver lining of independent power, is that if the more you reduce the offtake from Eskom, the more you take two benefits. One is the absolute power, and two, the price of the power. So the cost of power is coming down so quickly in alternative areas that if we then do this in a privatized, independent manner, we've fixed the price for ourselves. You're no longer going to be facing 18 and 30% increases in your power every single year. So the quicker we do that, we actually get off the risk of further governance and failures of corruption, because we know exactly what the cost was for our independent power, and it remains exactly that way for the next 20 years. So those are problems for South Africa. It's a great pity that money is being wasted that way. But changing the decision and changing the engagement model actually reduces your risk of power cost increases in the future.
A lot of scenario planning is needed in this respect. It's going to require, I imagine, flexibility, a certain degree of foresight, and a lot of courage as well. Volker, thank you very much.
You're welcome. All the best.